Question: how is the discovery of a lost Arabian metropolis beneath the sands of the UAE connected to a chain of cosmic events that plunged the ancient world into darkness? A vanished population, a sun that went black, a disease that swept across continents under Byzantium, whispers of an unseen entity moving through a king and his empire, and a truth that history has quietly forgotten until now. In 2024, Emirati archaeologists made a discovery that threatens to rewrite the history of the Arabian Peninsula and the entire region. The discovery was of an ancient lost city called Tuʻām, once thought to be a myth. According to lore, this city was a thriving metropolitan oasis and a center of trade and Christian life in the 6th century Gulf. Yet, without warning, it disappeared from history. No written record explained how. No invasion, no large-scale natural calamity, no trace of its people. Nothing. Its entire population vanished off the face of the earth in an instant. The first mystery is what happened here. But the answer appears to be tied to a second mystery, one that may be cosmic in scale. When these archaeologists dug further, they found a vast necropolis with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of human remains, showing no signs of violence, no trauma, no indication as to what fate befell them. Nothing. But whatever it was, it appears to be connected to the single greatest historical enigma that once plunged both Europe and the Middle East into literal darkness. An anomaly that turned the skies of the distant Mediterranean black, and according to Byzantium historians of that time, unleashed an army of predatory entities across the Mediterranean, taking the souls of millions due to the actions of one man, who they say wasn't entirely human. An entity they say that unwittingly brought down hell across the entire ancient Middle East. Welcome to the UAE, and one of the most beautiful landscapes on the entire peninsula, Al-Qaywin. In 2022, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Christian monastery on the island of Asinia. Not knowing this discovery would provide the first tangible clue to the true location of the lost city of Tuʻām, but also a connection to two of the greatest cataclysmic mysteries ever recorded in history. For many years, it was believed that the city existed near the borders of Oman, and the vast hostile stretch of desert, known as the Empty Quarter, were coincidentally the remains of a far more ancient city belonging to the tribe of Ad, a metropolis inhabited by humanoid giants, is believed to exist. But the real mystery surrounding Tuʻām not concerns its location, but what exactly happened to its population of thousands who vanished along with it. Archaeologists believe the monastery found in Al-Qaywin was built between 534 and 656 AD, where it was used by Nestorian monks. But within 2 years of their discovery, these archaeologists learned that it was also connected to the largest ancient settlement ever found on the Gulf coast of the Emirates. That settlement likely being the true lost city of Tuʻām. This city is believed to have been part of a network of Christian communities spread across the peninsula prior to the coming of Islam. However, there is something uniquely unusual about this particular city. Tuʻām appears to have been rapidly abandoned, suggesting a major regional event had occurred. While on the one hand, changing economic and regional stability may have played a role in its gradual demise. The discovery of mass, a term we have to censor due to the platform's automated guardrails, suggests an ancient horror that swept throughout the region. Tuʻām was connected to the Byzantium Empire through trade and cultural links, and historians of that time, including Procopius of Caesarea and John of Ephesus, wrote of anomalous entities attacking entire towns and cities within the empire, as well as locations outside of it, bringing with them a pestilence. So could Tuʻām be one of those cities? And what exactly were these supernatural creatures they and other Byzantine-era historians wrote about and allegedly witnessed? But before we explore this, it's important to understand the historical context of Tuʻām. The UAE, like much of the rest of the Gulf, is famed for pearl fishing, and before the emergence of oil was for centuries already a wealthy and thriving location due to its pearl fishing and related industries, since it served as a hub connecting global traders to the Middle East and to the powerful Roman Byzantium Empire, the seat of Christendom. Tuʻām is estimated to have been one of the wealthiest cities of its era, with historians hypothesizing that its pearl diving activity playing a significant role in its wealth. Its name, which means twins in Arabic, has been theorized not to refer to twins at all, but rather the Aramaic word Ptolemy, a reference to St. Thomas, the founding father of Eastern Christianity. At this point in time, the Arabs and wider Middle Eastern peoples followed different beliefs, as this was a short while before Islam came and unified the region. Here, St. Thomas was a disciple of Jesus, peace be upon him. And tradition tells us he set out for the East to convert the Persians to the new faith. It's generally believed that he traveled through the Gulf, past what is now Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and Oman, which is why 5th century monasteries and artifacts have continued to be found across the region. Unfortunately, with the Byzantium Empire becoming the center for early Christianity, this might have been the key component that led Tuʻām to its eventual demise, and its story slipping into the unexpected realm of cosmic horror. As mentioned, in addition to the buildings discovered at the al-Quwain site, archaeologists unearthed several spheres. The remains of these individuals seem consistent with those of the Byzantine peoples. The absence of skeletal trauma led researchers to theorize that the population succumbed to a deadly microorganism that during the reign of Emperor Justinian, who ruled Byzantium at the time, spread across North Africa and the Levant, ultimately touching a handful of communities deep in southern Arabia. Its name eventually became known as the Justinianic Plague. And as mentioned earlier, Byzantine scholars of the 6th century, living through the disaster itself, believed that this was not merely a rogue flu, but the latest in a series of supernaturally decreed punishments, beginning with the sun disappearing from the sky for nearly 2 years. Yep, as promised, this episode is about to get extremely weird. In 6th century Jordan, in the ancient town of Jerash, something strange began to unfold. A handful of members of the population were coming down with an odd flu. But what began as a simple cold very quickly twisted into a terrible fever, chills, and splitting headache. Word spread that the symptoms matched reports coming out of nearby Alexandria, stories of the same unseen affliction creeping west from Egypt. Then came the swellings beneath the skin, the coughing, the disorientation. While some were lucky enough to make a complete recovery, many didn't. Flash forward 1,483 years, and scientists in the UAE theorized that it is highly likely that the population of Tuʻām fell victim to a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, the official name of the microorganism that had made its way through 6th century Jordan and Egypt under Byzantine rule. But as it turned out, this bug was perhaps the least of the region's problems. In 541 AD, in his account of the germ that was now making its way through Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, Procopius wrote that non-human figures associated with the disease were visibly manifesting throughout the empire, an occurrence corroborated by other historians of the time from different parts of the Middle East and Europe who wrote of similar instances. These anomalous entities were actively hunting down survivors, sometimes appearing in the homes of both the sick and the healthy. Procopius states that some victims reported seeing, and I quote, supernatural beings in human guise, where people were accosted by demonic figures who would touch them, and upon contact, symptoms would appear or progress rapidly. He writes,
"It started from the Egyptians in Pelusium. Then it divided and moved in one direction towards Alexandria and the rest of Egypt, and in the other direction it came to Palestine, and from there the whole world. And in the second year it reached Byzantium in the middle of spring, where it happened that I was staying at that time. Apparitions of supernatural beings in human guise of every description were seen by many, and immediately upon seeing this apparition, they were seized also by the disease. Now at first, those who met these creatures tried to turn them aside by uttering the holiest of names and exorcising them in other ways, but they accomplished absolutely nothing. For even in the sanctuaries, where the most of them fled for refuge, they were dying constantly."
Doubling down on the supernatural nature of the bug, he states that even isolation was not enough to protect oneself, stating that some victims would encounter these entities in their sleep, writing,
"They would have a vision in a dream and seem to suffer the very same thing at the hands of the creature who stood over them, or else to hear a voice foretelling to them that they were written down in the number of those who were to succumb to the blight."
While many modern historians interpret Procopius's writings about spectral visitations during this time as a satirical critique of Emperor Justinian for reasons that will be explained shortly, his contemporary, the Syrian bishop John of Ephesus, recorded something far more difficult to explain. In his writings collectively titled under Ecclesiastical History, John documented a series of instances that were consistent with Procopius's accounts, but written from the perspective of someone who viewed the world biblically. Here he described spiritual manifestations moving across the Levant, describing entities that blurred the line between angels, omens, and something altogether unknown. Witnesses claimed these figures would appear briefly beside those who later fell ill, as if marking them in advance. But his most striking account described entire coastal communities reporting bronze-colored vessels gliding over the sea at night, crewed by silhouetted men who lacked heads. The apparitions moved silently and disappeared as quickly as they came, always according to witnesses, just before the outbreak reached their shores. Further north, beyond the empire's borders, reports from France tell of at least one instance of an oversized entity resembling a dragon that appeared above a coastal city and floated down to the sea, immediately preceding an outbreak of the plague in that area. Here, the French historian Gregory of Tours also documented a series of a variety of unusual aerial phenomena during this period, including reports of bright lights appearing around the sun and the sky turning to fire, with other accounts describing nights so illuminated they appeared as bright as day. Unfortunately, the variety of highly unusual atmospheric phenomena began years prior to the onset of the bacteria, when the skies turned black for 2 years. We'll explain the horror of this event in the next chapter, but suffice to say, it did not go unnoticed that both it and the plague, happening both during the reign of Justinian, led some to believe that both occurrences were two aspects of the same anomaly. Procopius gave a name to that anomaly, that being the Emperor Justinian himself, ruler of the Byzantium Empire, and, according to him, a cursed figure who brought hell down on his people, because he was not entirely human. According to Procopius's account, before he was born, Justinian's mother, Vigilania, had a demonic encounter. He writes that this demon was invisible, but its presence was felt distinctly. Afterward, it vanished, as though it had been a dream. On a side point, this lore is not alien to the Mediterranean region, and is similar to the Maghrebi lore of Zuhriya children in nearby Morocco. A more contemporary folk legend with Islamic roots, where Djinn are a hidden third party during the conceiving of a child. The resulting infant is believed to have been cursed, with either anomalous abilities or have anomalous elements within them that can be exploited by both warlocks and Djinn. Way back in ancient Rome, Procopius presented this rumor as one of several instances suggesting Justinian and his wife Theodora were not human, but demons who had assumed human form. It is alleged in these writings that men within his court, who were considered pure, witnessed firsthand Justinian's anomalous attributes. Procopius claimed to have heard from others that the emperor's head would vanish and reappear as he walked, or that his face would morph into a monstrous, featureless head, missing his eyes, nose, and mouth. This has led contemporary occult theorists to speculate that Justinian was an avatar for a particularly hostile demon from the underworld. But how does this directly relate to the plague? Well, in his work, Procopius wrote that a devout desert monk who had traveled to Constantinople saw Justinian's true form, that of a demon, what he described as the king of the devils. The plague was therefore implied to be a divine punishment from God for the wickedness of the emperor, due to the improper laws he was enacting across the empire, making him an existential threat to the entirety of humanity the further Byzantium's reach spread. Regardless of whether he was right or whether this was just political trolling, one thing modern historians have noted as almost verifiably true is that Justinian's actions ultimately spread the disease beyond the empire, reaching places as far afield as ancient France on the one hand, and the lost city of Tuʻām on the other, the latter of which saw hundreds, if not thousands, of its population wiped out. But this is just the beginning of the mystery, since both 6th century occultists and 21st century scientists believe that the catalyst for the infection possibly began months earlier, during what may have been a cosmic, but definitely seismic, event that has not been seen on such a scale since. What Procopius might have considered the first manifestation of God's punishment on the earth, the Dark Sun event. The term cascading disaster refers to a situation when an initial catastrophic event triggers a series of subsequent failures, which can build on one another, amplifying the overall impact. What our modern history books tend to ignore is one such series of events that had the potential to reset all progress humanity had made up until the 6th century, beginning with Rome. Two of these events we have covered so far, the natural and allegedly supernatural. So here is the timeline of how those two events fit into a broader cascading disaster of an unprecedented scale. In 482, Justinian I was born. By 527, he ascended the throne as Emperor of Byzantium, but by 541, the first cases of what became known as the Justinian plague emerged in Egypt, quickly spreading to Jordan, Syria, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, Greece, Rome, and beyond. Simultaneously, within 3 years, if the accounts Procopius and other scholars living at that time are to be taken literally, the mass manifestation of multiple variants of aggressive, anomalous entities appeared across the reach of Byzantium and even Europe. And so, by 544, tens of thousands had perished. Though the empire would eventually recover, but later fall to the Ottomans, the genesis of its disaster occurred 9 years earlier, in 536, when the sun went dark for 18 months, an event that scientists today say likely kick-started the horrors to come. What caused this solar event to occur is still debated today. Was it a cosmic impact, divine punishment, or something far stranger? Procopius described that year as one in which the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, its rays smothered by a fog that cloaked the sky. Similar accounts poured in from across Europe, parts of the wider Middle East, and even into Asia. The sky had turned perpetually black. Other chroniclers confirmed Procopius's description. John of Ephesus and Zacharias of Mytilene both spoke of a dark sun that blotted out day and night between 535 and 536 AD. Zacharias wrote grimly, that many birds perished, and there was distress among men from the evil things. Which raises the question, was Procopius right? Were these evil things the work of Emperor Justinian himself? Although he never blames the Dark Sun event on him directly, he does in his writings construct the narrative in a way that leads the reader to that conclusion, which is exactly the technique of blame by association. A point he makes less ambiguously when the terrifying bacterium arrived shortly afterwards. So how exactly does this Dark Sun event connect to the spread of the bacterium? While much of this dark era has been omitted from most history books, it was only during the last 30 years when archaeological evidence from Ireland to the UAE has increasingly shown that something seriously went wrong during the 6th century. Scientific consensus states that the Dark Sun event of 536 was possibly caused either by a meteor impact or, more likely, a chain of massive volcanic eruptions that plunged the northern hemisphere into what's now called a volcanic winter. Scientists rationalize that ash and dust veiled the sky, dropping global temperatures by 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius, the coldest decade in over 2 millennia. This led to crops failing, snowfall where it never had before, and mass food shortages across many continents. Additional eruptions in 540 and 547 compounded the effects, prolonging the cold and devastation. And yet, the volcanic theory is still unproven. It's a very educated guess, but not yet a proven certainty. Others propose alternate explanations, such as a meteor strike, divine retribution, or even, according to one contemporary author, extraterrestrial involvement, mixing both the ET idea and a comet impact. It's even been theorized that if certain bacteria can survive a comet impact, that the plague itself could have arrived from beyond Earth, carried by a cosmic body that blotted out the sun before infecting humanity. But regardless of the perspective, the proximity of the two disasters, the Dark Sun and the plague, has led historians to link them as cause and effect. The blackened skies triggered the conditions that made the disease so catastrophic. It depleted food resources, creating a global population with a weakened immunity. So while there's more evidence for a geological cause than merely Justinian's presence, he can still be squarely blamed for what came next. As a man, or a demon at least according to Procopius, who was himself infected by the very disease that would come to bear his name, Justinian made a catastrophic error. In order to feed his people and sustain his armies, he imported enormous quantities of grain from Africa. But those grain ships sailing out of Egypt also carried rats and the fleas that lived on them, and these were likely the true carriers of the plague, as those vermin spread through the trade routes of the Byzantine world, reaching even the distant port town of Tuʻām. It seems that the horrors that engulfed the northern and most western parts of the MENA region may have played a role in its vanishing, but this remains an ongoing field of investigation. Thank you if you've made it this far, and yes, I know we covered a lot of dates and places, so here's a summary for those who may have gotten lost along the way. So to put it simply, the crisis began with a dark sky event, triggered by some kind of large-scale geological seismic anomaly, collapsing the northern hemisphere's ecosystem. The sudden cooling led to failed harvests and a population weakened by hunger and exposure, creating a perfect environment for sickness. Justinian's subsequent efforts to feed his empire through Egypt's vast grain fleets unwittingly turned his ships into carriers of vermin, spreading infection to every corner of Byzantium and beyond. And if the writings of Procopius, Gregory of Tours, and John of Ephesus are to be taken literally, this calamity drew the attention of hostile spiritual entities to the empire, further magnifying the scale of the cataclysm. But ultimately, to believe their words or not, it's up to you, as the only tangible evidence left are archaeological remains. This takes us back to the United Arab Emirates discovery. Yes, this topic's a little different for the channel. But after learning about the 6th century research in the Northern Emirates and the historical context of the lost city, we had to see how deep the rabbit hole really went, never expecting it to be Lovecraftian in scale. Archaeology in the UAE and wider Gulf is still relatively new compared to places like Egypt or Jordan, yet recent discoveries are completely changing how we see Arabia's ancient past. While Iraq and Bahrain have long drawn attention for their Persian and Mesopotamian connections, the UAE is starting to reveal a different side, one rooted in early Arab civilization, regional trade, and a surprising mix of beliefs. Tuʻām is a perfect example, a crossroads of faiths, commerce, and culture that linked Arabia to Byzantium and beyond. Its rediscovery doesn't just fill a historical gap. It ties the Gulf's ancient world to one of history's greatest overlooked mysteries. So, how much did you know about the dark sky event of the 6th century, or the shadow Emperor Justinian left across the Mediterranean and the MENA region? And do you believe the words of the 6th century scholars, historians and theologians, John of Ephesus, Gregory of Tours, and of course Procopius of Caesarea, that actual supernatural entities haunted the cities of the extended Byzantium reach? While Procopius has been described as an unreliable, almost hypocritical critic of Justinian, with cynics saying his writings were more satirical, John's accounts of ghost ships, phantom sailors, and entities that would mark its victims before they became ill was written coldly and analytically as if chronicling real events, suggesting an extraordinary occurrence was indeed taking place. It's fascinating that such an incredible event and similar that have been confined to folklore that touched large parts of the ancient world are not spoken about as much as you would think it deserves. But we are going to change that. In the next episodes, we'll be diving even deeper into the hidden histories of the Gulf and the wider region. So if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon. And inshallah, we'll see you very soon in the next one.